Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you to the organizer for organizing, I think, which is a very important meeting. The topic of the meeting is something I'm interested in. I've been interested in since a long time. And it's good to be in a meeting where I don't know many people, which means we are bringing new people into the field and sharing different ideas. Now, as you see today, I'm working for GSK. And GSK Vaccines is an established vaccine company. It has the largest vaccine portfolio worldwide, more than 30 vaccines licensed. Provides vaccines both to the Western world, 20%, and to low-income countries, 80%. So, and is a well-established vaccine company, economically well balanced to do vaccines today. And so, but I only recently joined GSK. That was 2 years ago. Before that, I've been still in the private sector. I was head of research and development for Chiron vaccines before, for Novartis later. And most of the things I'm going to say are derived from the experience that I gained during my period Chiron and Novartis. And the theme that I had to deal with at that time was always that in a biotech or in a company like Novartis, I always had to justify the investment in research and development for new vaccines against the investment for new pharmaceuticals. And you may guess that I lost all the time. And so what you're going to see from my slides is basically the reasoning and the things what I gained during that period. Now, before I go into the real thing, I want to start with something which is nothing to do with my real presentation, but it's a tale that I heard from my grandmother, and which I think is important to see. So this is what my grandmother used to tell me. So you have a vendor, basically it's got selling a lot of different things, but then he decides to do a trick. Takes the same cheese and split one in half and puts a price of 20 euros on this one. My grandmother was saying lire, but now it's and puts the other 5 euros in the other one. And then the day goes on. At the end of the day, the one of 20 euros was finished, and the one of 5 euros was still there. Now, that's, I guess, this type of tale is present in different cultures, different things, but it's about human nature. We assign value to the things where we perceive there is value, and money is value. Now, why do I show these things before my presentation? Because there are a lot of people, textbooks and things, that say vaccines must be cheap, which if you interpret with these things, we are saying vaccines have no value, you should not invest in them, or things like that. And it's not just, I'm not saying which price vaccines should have, because we should not confound the value of vaccines with the access to vaccines. Access is extremely important. Everybody should have access. But when we think about value, if we push the value too low with a price, people will understand we are giving them things which are not value. So that was what my grandmother used to tell me. Now, let's go into the real presentation. Now, in trying to visualize the value of vaccines, basically, come back to the history of man, which recently has become very interesting. Up to a few years ago, we thought the evolution of our species started 1.8 million years ago. Today, we know this more than 3 million. And with a new ability to sequence the genomes of our ancestors in pieces of bones found in caves in South Africa and Asia, we have been able to establish a lot of new things that we didn't know before. For instance, that in the European Asian, we have 2-3% of Neanderthal genes, these kind of things. But anyway, what we know is that at some point, human went out of Africa and colonized the things. And when we talk about the human evolution, we never talk about one pretty important thing, I believe, which is life expectancy. Life expectancy for 3 million years has been more or less 25, 35 years. Then recently in terms of 3 million years, in 750, life expectancy started to go up, and today in the Western world is 80, 85 years. And which means, and then we don't know where it's going to end up. If you believe the Time magazine that says the children born today will live up to 140 years. We'll see. We'll wait and see whether that's true. But bottom line is that since 1700, our species gained 55 years of life expectancy. Since 1900, which is really in a 3 million years, basically just a drop in the ocean, we gained 35 years of life expectancy. Now, if you look at what we gained since 1900, 35 years, I mean, the things which really allowed to gain this life expectancy have been three things. Modern medicine. Modern medicine has been calculated as being gaining more or less between 10 and 12 years. The rest of the life expectancy has been gained by conquering infectious diseases. So there are more than 20 years in life expectancy in 1 century gained by conquering infectious diseases. And you know, conquering infectious diseases has been largely vaccines and hygiene. So I would say that if you look at these things in terms of health gains, I mean, vaccines provide a huge health gain to our society, and you will expect to see that somehow valued in health economic considerations. Is that the case? I would say no. So assuming that vaccine generated even similar gains to pharmaceuticals, they should have equal value. But the total market of vaccines is between 2 and 3% of the total market of pharmaceuticals. So this morning when I was thinking of the numbers, I mean, this is cost-effective 12.3, 0.5. I was saying, Jesus, that's 0.3 is important, but we are at least 5 or 100-fold off the real value. I mean, I'm not. What I'm trying to say is that those numbers that were today, and which are in all care evaluations, I mean, are very important. I mean, I have deep respect for all the work that you do and the people do, because they really help making decisions, and they're very important. But we as a society, we are basically lost the opportunity to put the full value on vaccination. We are 50 or 100-fold off. And I don't know where it is, that part, why we not capture into our evaluations. But that's my consideration. So how do we make decisions today? Well, you do much better than me. I'm not an health economist, but we do cost per quality. And while the costs are pretty easy to calculate, I mean, I doubt that the qualities are able to capture the real value of vaccines. Well, but why do we need cost effectiveness? I've taken some words from a publication in JAMA this year. Basically, I thought there was a good justification why we need cost effectiveness. Basically, it says a value cannot be placed on human life, but resources are finite, and an ethical imperative mandates selection of those interventions that will provide the greatest good to the greatest number of people. Makes sense. We need cost effectiveness to make decisions. We should be aware that when we do this, there are limitations, and that basically when we make prioritization, basically this may be inconsistent with the value that people will normally assign to these things. In other words, the cost per quality may be how policymakers or managers for a public program will assign value, but not how the population it serves that has to pay for it will do so. So, I mean, it's important that we have cost effectiveness, and we need to be aware of the limitations. However, I don't think we should take cost effectiveness too seriously, or at least we should use with a little bit of brain. Because you could look at this paper, basically says that, well, Christmas is not cost effective. And so, and obviously when we make decisions, we are not using the same. I mean, and obviously, yes, basically there is a significant opportunity cost with Christmas. And basically there is no discussion. I mean, that's so I think there is a good reason to do cost effectiveness. We need numbers to justify what we do, but we also need to be able to evaluate them and take as an indication to help us to decide, but not take them absolute value for what we do. I mean, I think the United States are a good example where they do cost effectiveness, but at the end, the decisions are independent, many of them, of the things. For instance, there is this nice paper published where they look at the value of vaccines to the United States between 1994 and 2013, and they realized that in 10 years, that brought 295 billion saving in direct cost to the country. But then they also put together the societal cost, and they got that the real value was much more, 1.38 trillion. So basically, you can put different numbers into the evaluation of vaccines, and the values can be completely different. Now, today, there are several different ways of looking at cost effectiveness or evaluating the value of vaccines. And basically, if you go down, for instance, in the UK, they basically will evaluate the vaccine cost effectiveness if it's a 20,000 pounds per quality. Now, in the WHO recommend that they include the direct cost only, and that will be 2 or 3 times the GDP of the country. Then, if you put the indirect cost, like we will do in other places, basically you can go much higher. If you take the recommendation of David Bloom, basically to capture the full value of health, you can get even more. And if you go to to get a recommendation of the smart vaccines, I will describe shortly, basically you will have even much more value. Now, as a person heading a R&D group in companies, I mean, this is my matrix. So if you are here, you don't invest. If you are here, you invest. So that says that if the entire world would be run according to the UK, we would not have a vaccine company surviving. If we start to put the larger values or all the broad values of vaccines, then you will have an healthy economy. And here are examples of decisions that go into this direction. I think the most important decision, for instance, was in the United States when they decided to replace the OPV with IPV. That was costing $4 million per quality, but safety was basically overrushing that, and they made the decision to, although they made the cost effectiveness, they decided it was still worth it investing in it. So I think that's what is the spectrum of the vaccine evaluations. And I think if we want to have a healthy development of vaccines, we need to be in this range. Now, back in 2009, I started to be part of a group, the Institute of Medicine, that basically tried to address this problem. How do we make how do we assign the right value to vaccines? How do we make vaccines more attractive for the people that use them, but also for the people who need to develop them? And we published several different booklets, and we developed a software we call Smart Vaccines. Smart Vaccines basically was saying one thing. Well, SMART stands for Strategic Multi-Attribute Ranking Tool for Vaccines. And basically said, well, we don't want to eliminate cost per quality. It's important. Economic evaluation of vaccines is very important, but should not be the only criterion that is used to make decisions. And we basically added 27 attributes to the cost per quality. So, and then we added health consideration, economic consideration, even beyond cost per quality, demographic consideration, public concerns, scientific and business consideration, programmatic consideration, intangible values, policy, and other things that people could add. As soon as we published that, people went crazy, or not. They told us that we were crazy. And the reason was understandable. They said, well, we had one way to make decisions with cost effectiveness. It's imperfect, it's okay, but we knew how to make a decision. Now you bring 27 different variables, we'll never be able to make a decision. So that was a fair criticism. So we decided to address that point, and we convened a meeting, and we brought 60 people in a room, and basically we discussed whether we could come down with some criteria how to prioritize things. We are agreed that we'll not be using 27 different criteria, but we could prioritize which of the. So the first question was, among the 27 different criteria, are there criteria that will be universal for low-income countries, high-income countries, for pandemics, for manufacturers, and at the end, we came down with a consensus. There were three important criteria that basically will be important in any decision making. One was mortality and severity of disease. So the other one was obviously safety. And the third one obviously was an economic evaluation, but was not just cost effectiveness. It was an economic evaluation that will capture the full benefits of vaccination. So those things were basically the three top values that will be available to everybody or to any decision making. And then you could have other attributes. For instance, let's take emerging infection. If in addition to these three, you will look at the epidemic potential, rare but severe disease, for instance. If we had rare but severe disease and high mortality, then you will develop a vaccine for Ebola, because now you have two top criteria you can put there. I mean, if you are a manufacturer, you could have all these criteria, but if the vaccine is not feasible, you will never invest on it. So feasibility is important. While if you are from a developed country, very often economic consideration like rare, frequent non-severe illness that causes hospitalization can become very important. So basically, in addition to these three, you could add other things, but will make easier to make decisions. So I think that's the conclusion that we got, and the consensus was that we do need multi-criteria. One of the criteria is an economic evaluation, but has to go beyond cost effectiveness. And then you can add other things, but will be impossible to make a good decision just taking only one parameter. Now, those are the conclusion of the meeting we had last summer, and things are still there. I think with this recommendation, you could probably make better prioritization than we have been doing so far. And so where are we going with vaccines? Now, vaccines have done a fantastic job for infants and children. Basically, they eliminated all these diseases. We are missing RSV, but that will come. I think technically it's solved. In 10, 15 years, we're going to have an RSV vaccine. So the next targets obviously are pregnancy, adolescents, adults. The next big targets are the elderly. But then we have other needs for today's vaccines. So poverty, low-income countries. There's a long list of diseases, but the cost effectiveness and the things that we have today don't justify investing in these things. So our society has not yet found a solution, basically to a sustainable solution to develop these vaccines, and we know we can make them. So the only solution that I found was to basically set up an institute that will be non-for-profit, that can do 1 or 2 vaccines. There are several examples of this, but that cannot solve the global problem. You can tackle 1 or 2 problems, but the economic sustainable solution is not there. The other thing that puzzles us a lot today are emerging infections. And obviously, I mean, we had Ebola, we are having Zika, we have MERS, all these kind of things. And the question is, how do we make decisions? And I'll show you how I think we make decisions. So if you look at all these emerging infections, basically they have different times, different things, but the shape of the curve is more or less the same. There is a first case, things come, they peak, and then they go away. Now, how do we react to that? Well, basically, shortly after the first case, the media catch up the thing. They make a lot of noise. The media generates the money. The money generates the activities. Now, people have never been working on that disease, or now they all become active because the money and the medical need is there. And now you get basically industry, biotech, people in academia, they all rush into doing things. And immediately you get so many experts in these new things. And as soon as the things become at the peak of the activities, unfortunately, you are at the end of the epidemic. And now what happens is basically you get the end of the epidemic, which means the end of money, and which means the end of the project. So that's the way we've been making decisions so far. And what's the consequence? Basically, is a reactive mode. It's not effective because when we get there, it's too late. It's not sustainable because industry basically is always frustrated because you do all these activities, deprioritize your internal project to do this, and then nobody say even thanks. And well, that's the reality. I've been in the influenza pandemic. I mean, I've been 15 days before with Ministry of Health. They were saying, unless you help me, I'm desperate. And 15 days later, they were throwing me out of the room because they don't need it. So that's the way things happen. The most important thing is that we have not learned any lesson. We continue to repeat exactly the same mistake with all the emerging diseases. So I think it's time to change. And what the solution is basically, instead of starting to react when it's too late, we should be proactive. Now, what do we need to be proactive? We need somehow an health economic evaluation that shows that it's worth investing ahead of time. In 1999, when at the NIH they had the Ebola vaccine ready, the people were laughing. You want to develop a vaccine? You want to invest on that? Come on. And it's not cost effective. But then it costed a lot. So if we had someone with the right cost effectiveness in 1999, the Ebola was never going to come. So I think that's what we need. And I don't have the solution. I'm only looking at the problem. And I want to conclude with one example that comes from this year. This was a sad story. Is a Faye, a girl, a 2-year-old girl in UK. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2016, she died from meningococcus B. She was 2 years old, and she was not part of the vaccination program that is in the United Kingdom to vaccinate all the newborns with meningococcus B. And the parents put the slide of the girl into the media, and not this one, the ones where she was in intensive care. And that generated huge emotion. In 2 weeks, there were 120,000 signatures collected that basically in the UK said, we want these vaccines, not only for the newborns, but also for the 1 to 10 years old. But the answer was, it's not cost effective. So I don't know who's right, who's wrong. Here there are people, they're paying taxes, they provide their value, and there's the health economist that says, I mean, I don't care what you think. I mean, you are not cost effective. So that's the dilemma, but basically, in other words, cost per quality may be how policymakers or managers of public program will assign value, but not how the population is serviced or that pay for it will do so. So I think that's the dilemma that we are living. And I think that I will not provide a solution because I don't have one, but collectively I think we could try to find one. Thank you.